If you're lying awake right now with your mind racing, or you clicked this because stress is eating you alive, you're in exactly the right place. In the next few minutes, something ancient and powerful is going to start working on that knot in your chest, that endless loop of worry that follows you everywhere. Here's what most people don't know. Over 1,000 years ago, Buddhist masters discovered specific stories that could literally rewire an anxious brain. Not through complicated meditation or years of study, but through something as simple as listening. Tonight, you're going to hear 48 of these stories, and each one is designed to do something your mind desperately needs. To stop, to rest, to finally let go. If it feels right, drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight. Are you in bed in Chicago at 2 a.m., or maybe driving home from another exhausting day in London? Wherever you are, grab something soft, dim the lights if you can, and get ready to feel your nervous system start to unwind. Take one deep breath with me right now. In through your nose for 4 counts. Hold it and release everything. The ancient masters who left us these gifts knew exactly what you're going through. They're about to show you the way out. There was a monk who couldn't sleep. Night after night, his mind would circle the same question like a bird trapped in a cage. You know that feeling, don't you? When your thoughts won't let you rest, when you need an answer so desperately that the not knowing becomes a physical ache in your chest. He finally gathered the courage to approach Master Joshu, his voice barely a whisper. Does a dog have Buddha nature? This wasn't intellectual curiosity. This was a soul crying out for certainty in an uncertain world. Joshu looked into those tired eyes, saw the exhaustion that comes from thinking too much, and offered one simple word: mu. Nothing. No. The monk's face crumpled. This wasn't the answer he'd come for. But something deeper than disappointment was stirring in his chest. For the first time in months, his mind went completely quiet. Feel that silence for a moment. Mu. What if every question keeping you awake tonight could receive that same gentle response? Not because your concerns don't matter, but because sometimes the kindest thing you can offer an overworked mind is permission to not know. Permission to rest in the mystery instead of solving your way to peace. But wait, there's something I need to tell you about what happened to that monk afterwards. Because this is where the story gets really interesting. He didn't just walk away confused and disappointed. He stayed with that word mu for months, carrying it with him like a stone in his pocket. Every time his mind started its familiar spiraling, he would whisper it to himself. Mu. And slowly, something extraordinary began to happen. The word stopped being a word and became a doorway. A doorway into the space where all questions dissolve, where peace lives before your mind divides it into problems and solutions. Maybe you've been carrying your own version of that monk's question tonight. Maybe you're lying there wondering about your relationship, your career, your purpose, your worth? What if those questions don't need answers right now? What if they just need the gentle recognition that it's okay to not know? Let Mu work its ancient magic on whatever's keeping your mind busy. In that same monastery lived Master 𝘼𝙘𝙘𝙘, who had discovered something beautiful about the nature of truth. When visitors came with complex spiritual questions, desperate for elaborate teachings, he would simply raise his finger toward the sky. That gesture contained everything. No words needed. No explanations. Just that pure pointing toward what was always already here. A young attendant watched this daily miracle and began copying his master. But copying and being are different things, aren't they? One day, with the fierce love that only truth can inspire, 𝘼𝙘𝙘𝙘 cut off the boy's imitation finger. As the child ran away crying, 𝘼𝙘𝙘𝙘 called his name. When the boy turned, tears streaming, the master slowly raised his own finger. In that moment, the boy's tears transformed from pain to recognition. He saw what he'd been missing. The finger was never the point. The pointing was everything. Here's what nobody tells you about that story. The boy lived to be 93 years old, and for the rest of his life, whenever anyone asked him about that day, he would smile and say, "I learned the difference between having the answer and being the answer." He never raised his finger again, but somehow, everything he did became a pointing toward truth. The way he swept the courtyard, the way he served tea, the way he listened to troubled visitors. His whole life became one continuous gesture toward what matters most. Right now, you're not learning about Zen. You're experiencing it. The peace settling into your bones isn't coming from understanding these words. It's arising from the simple act of listening, of being present to something larger than your worried thoughts. This is what 𝘼𝙘𝙘𝙘's finger was pointing toward all along. But let me share something that might surprise you. There was another master in a neighboring monastery who heard about 𝘼𝙘𝙘𝙘's finger pointing and decided to visit. When he arrived, he asked 𝘼𝙘𝙘𝙘 the deepest question he could think of. Up went the finger, just as expected. But this master smiled and said, "Thank you for showing me what you don't understand." Then he walked away, leaving 𝘼𝙘𝙘𝙘 speechless for the first time in decades. That night, 𝘼𝙘𝙘𝙘 couldn't sleep. He sat in his garden, looking at his finger, wondering if he had become trapped by his own teaching method. Had his pointing become just another performance? In that moment of doubt, something deeper awakened in him. He realized that true teaching isn't about having the perfect gesture or the right answer. It's about being so present, so authentic, that whatever arises becomes medicine for whoever needs it. From that night forward, 𝘼𝙘𝙘𝙘's finger carried a different quality entirely. Not the confidence of someone who knows, but the humility of someone who continues to discover. Maybe you know this feeling of wondering if you're just going through the motions in your own life. Going through the same routines, saying the same things, hoping they still carry meaning. There's something beautiful about those moments of questioning, isn't there? They're invitations to freshness, to discovering what wants to emerge when you stop relying on what worked yesterday. Master 𝘽𝙪𝙘𝙀 once presented an impossible choice that mirrors every difficult decision you've ever faced. Imagine a man hanging from a tree branch by his teeth over a precipice, he said softly. Someone below asks him a question that could save their spiritual life. If he doesn't answer, he fails them. If he opens his mouth, he falls to his death. The students sat in stunned silence, feeling the weight of impossible choices they recognized from their own lives. Maybe for you it's the choice between staying in work that pays the bills but kills your spirit, or following your heart into uncertainty. Maybe it's speaking a truth that might end a relationship, or staying silent and betraying yourself. These moments when every option carries unacceptable consequences. When you're hanging by your teeth over your own personal cliff. But what if the teaching isn't about solving the dilemma? What if it's about learning to breathe in that impossible space? Sometimes the most honest response is simply acknowledging that you don't know what to do and finding peace in that honesty. Years later, a student asked 𝘽𝙪𝙀𝙀 what he thought the man in the tree should actually do. 𝘽𝙪𝙀𝙀 was quiet for a long time before answering. I think, he said slowly, the man would open his mouth and fall. Not because it's the right answer, but because some truths are worth dying for. And in that falling, something new would be born that never could have existed while he was hanging on so tightly. The student asked, but wouldn't he die? 𝘽𝙪𝙀𝙀 smiled. Who says falling is the end of the story? There's something here about the courage to let go when holding on has become more painful than the unknown. About trusting the process of transformation, even when you can't see where it leads. Maybe there's something in your life right now that you're gripping so tightly, it's cutting off circulation to your soul. What would it feel like to consider that letting go might be the beginning of something beautiful rather than the end of something safe? A young monk burst into Master Joshu's presence, eyes bright with spiritual ambition. I've just entered the monastery, he announced. Please teach me the path to enlightenment. You can feel his eagerness, can't you? That hunger for transformation, for techniques that will finally bring lasting peace. Joshu asked the most ordinary question, have you eaten your rice porridge? The monk nodded, confused. Then wash your bowl, Joshu said simply. No complex, meditation, instructions. No reading assignments. Just this, complete what you've begun. In that moment, the monk understood something revolutionary. The awakening he sought wasn't hiding in advanced teachings or future achievements. It was here, in the natural completion of ordinary tasks. In bringing full presence to washing a simple bowl. How much peace becomes available when you stop seeking it elsewhere and honor it exactly where you are. But here's what I love about this story. 20 years later, that same monk became a teacher himself. Students would come to him seeking profound wisdom, and he would ask them about their breakfast, tell them to wash their bowls. One day, a frustrated student said, "Master, I've heard this teaching 100 times. When will you give me something deeper?" The monk smiled and handed him a dirty bowl. "Show me how you wash this," he said. The student grabbed the bowl and scrubbed it roughly, impatiently. "Faster, please," he muttered. "I have important spiritual work to do." The teacher gently took the bowl back and began washing it himself. Slowly, carefully, as if it were the most precious thing in the world. He felt the weight of it, noticed the texture of the clay, paid attention to the temperature of the water. The watching student gradually grew quiet, then amazed. "Master," he whispered, "you're washing that bowl like it's sacred." "Isn't it?" the teacher replied. That's when it hits you, isn't it? The realization that there is no ordinary moment, no mundane task, no unimportant breath. That enlightenment isn't about achieving extraordinary states, but about bringing extraordinary presence to the most ordinary experiences. What if the dishes waiting in your sink are actually altars? What if the next email you write could be a love letter to existence itself? What if washing your bowl is the most advanced spiritual practice you'll ever need? There was once a respected teacher who made a mistake that would haunt him for centuries. When asked whether enlightened beings were subject to cause and effect, he answered with spiritual pride, "Enlightened people transcend such laws." The universe has its own way of teaching humility. For 500 lifetimes, he lived as a fox, learning wisdom through vulnerability and hunger. No spiritual concepts could protect him from cold winters or the simple need for food. He learned enlightenment through the honest body of an animal. Centuries later, this fox appeared to Master 𝘼𝙘𝙘𝙀, carrying both ancient shame and hard-won wisdom. "Please ask me that question again," he begged. When 𝘼𝙘𝙀𝙀 asked about cause and effect, the fox replied with words earned through lifetimes of humility, "An enlightened person is one with the law of causation. Not above it, but dancing gracefully within it." In that moment of complete acceptance, the fox was free. This story lives in every moment you try to transcend your humanity instead of embracing it. Every time you imagine that awakening means escaping your limitations rather than finding peace within them. The fox learned what we all must learn. Freedom comes not from rising above life's constraints, but from loving them as part of our wholeness. True enlightenment doesn't make you superhuman. It makes you exquisitely, courageously human. Master 𝘼𝙘𝙘𝙀 once shared a riddle that would transform his students' understanding of what makes life work. He spoke of 𝘼𝙘𝙘𝙀, the master wheelmaker whose creations were sought throughout the land. 𝘼𝙘𝙘𝙀 made perfect wheels with 50 spokes, he said slowly. But what if you removed the hub that holds everything together? The students immediately saw the problem. Without the central hub, the wheel would collapse. But 𝘼𝙘𝙘𝙀 was pointing towards something profound. The hub is empty space, yet it's the most essential part. Without that emptiness at the center, nothing can turn, nothing can move forward. Your life works the same way. How much of your peace depends not on what you accumulate, but on the spacious awareness at your center. That still point of consciousness that remains unchanged, whether you're busy or resting, celebrating or grieving. When you fill every moment with activity, every silence with noise, you remove the hub from your own wheel. You create impressive motion that can't actually go anywhere because it lacks the essential stillness that allows for real progress. Feel that hub-like quality in your awareness right now. That spacious center that's been here all along, watching your experiences without being disturbed by them. This is the part of you that needs no improvement, the wheel that never breaks, the peace that was here before you learned to worry. A student once approached Master Joshu with a question that revealed everything wrong with how we think about spiritual achievement. I heard about a Buddha from ancient times who meditated for 10 cosmic cycles, but still couldn't reach enlightenment, he said. How is this possible? Joshu smiled with infinite tenderness. Your question answers itself, he replied. Since he was trying to become a Buddha, he wasn't yet being one. The seeking prevented the finding. This cuts to the heart of every spiritual struggle. What if the peace you're working so hard to achieve is actually what you're working with right now? What if the awareness you want to develop is the very consciousness wondering about awareness? The ancient Buddha was caught in the exhausting cycle of trying to become something he already was. Like searching for your glasses while wearing them, or looking everywhere for keys that are in your hand. Can you feel where you might be doing this in your own life? Trying to earn worthiness, instead of recognizing the value that was never missing. Working to achieve peace, instead of noticing the stillness that's already here. Right now, without changing anything about yourself, you have access to the same awareness every Buddha has pointed toward. Not as something to attain, but as the ground you're already standing on. Master Joshu loved visiting hermits who practiced in remote mountain caves. He approached one such hermit with a simple question: "What is here?" The hermit raised his fist, but something felt hollow about the gesture, performed rather than lived. Ships cannot dock where the water is too shallow, Joshu said sadly, and left. Days later, he returned with the same question. Again, the hermit raised his fist, but this time, something fundamental had shifted. This time, the gesture arose from authentic depths. Well given, well taken, well killed, well saved, Joshu said with delight, bowing deeply. What changed? Not the words, not the gesture, not even the people involved. But the quality of truth behind the response had transformed completely. This teaches us that authentic spiritual expression isn't about having correct answers or making proper gestures. It's about the depth of being we bring to each moment. When you respond from genuine presence rather than spiritual performance, even silence becomes a transmission of truth. Even the simplest words carry healing power. In your own life, in your own relationships, how often are you performing what you think others want to hear instead of speaking from your real experience? Your nervous system knows the difference instantly. When someone is truly present with you, speaking from lived truth rather than borrowed concepts, you feel it in your body. The hermit's second response was authentic because it came from being rather than seeming, from depth rather than surface. It created the kind of connection that makes real spiritual friendship possible. As these first whispers from the ancient masters settle into your consciousness, notice what's happening in your body. The peace you're feeling isn't something you're creating through effort. It's something you're uncovering by allowing these timeless voices to work their gentle magic on your nervous system. Each story carries medicine for a different aspect of human suffering: the permission to not know, the power of authentic simplicity, the grace found in impossible choices, the sacred nature of ordinary completion, the wisdom of embracing your full humanity, the essential emptiness that makes everything possible, the futility of seeking what you already are, and the beauty of responding from genuine depths. These are just the first gifts from teachers who understood something profound about the relationship between story and healing, between listening and letting go. But we've only begun to explore the treasures they preserved for hearts exactly like yours, for souls that know there must be something more than the endless cycling of worry and temporary satisfaction. As the night deepens and these ancient monasteries fade into the mist of memory, other stories are waiting to meet you, each one a doorway into even more profound recognition of what you've never actually lost. In mountain hermitages where silence taught more than words, other masters were discovering that sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do is cut through the drama that keeps people stuck in their own suffering. Master Nansen was about to demonstrate this in a way that would shock his students and echo through history. The eastern and western halls of his monastery had been fighting over a cat for weeks. Not just any cat, but a beautiful temple cat that both groups claimed as their own. The arguments grew more heated each day, with monks actually arguing about possession, ownership, who deserved the cat's affection. Can you imagine? These are people who had supposedly renounced all worldly attachments, fighting over a cat like children over a toy. One day, Nansen had enough. He walked into the courtyard where the monks were gathered, picked up the cat, and held it high above his head. "If any of you can say one true word," he announced, "you can save this cat. If not, I will cut it in two." The monks stood in stunned silence. All their philosophical training, all their meditation practice, all their spiritual concepts, and not one of them could speak a single word of authentic truth. So Nansen did exactly what he promised. He cut the cat in half. That evening, when Joshua returned from his travels, Nansen told him what had happened. Without hesitation, Joshua took off his sandals, placed them on his head, and walked out of the room. "If you had been here," Nansen said with deep satisfaction, "you could have saved the cat." Now, before you get upset about the cat, let me tell you something most people miss about this story. There are scholars who believe no actual cat was harmed, that this was a teaching demonstration using a stuffed cat or wooden figure. But that's not really the point, is it? The point is what happens when we get so caught up in our positions, our righteousness, our need to be right, that we lose sight of what actually matters. How many relationships have you seen destroyed by people fighting over who's right instead of asking what's loving? Joshua's response with the sandals on his head was perfect because it was completely absurd, completely outside the framework of argument and position-taking. It was pure, spontaneous authenticity that cut through all the mental drama immediately. Sometimes, the most enlightened response to conflict isn't to take a side or find a compromise. Sometimes it's to do something so unexpected, so genuine, that it stops everyone's story-making mind in its tracks. What would it look like to put sandals on your head in the middle of your own stuck patterns? But wait, there's more to Joshua's story that night. After he walked out with the sandals on his head, he went to the temple garden and sat with the monks who had been fighting. One of them asked him, "Master, why did you put your sandals on your head?" Joshua looked at him with infinite tenderness and said, "Because my feet were tired of walking on the same old ground." Then he smiled and added, "Sometimes the only way to save what we love is to turn our whole world upside down." In another monastery, Master Tokusan was learning that perfect timing isn't about following schedules, but about being so present that you naturally flow with the rhythm of life itself. He was walking from the meditation hall to the dining room, carrying his eating bowl, when the cook saw him and said, "The dinner drum hasn't been beaten yet. Where are you going with your bowl?" Tokusan stopped, looked around as if waking from a dream, and silently returned to his room. When another master heard about this incident, he laughed and said, "Old Tokusan doesn't understand ultimate truth." Word got back to Tokusan, who asked to meet with this critic. The next day, Tokusan delivered a completely different kind of teaching to the assembled monks. Where before he had been precise, methodical, predictable, now he spoke with wild spontaneity and freedom. The master who had criticized him was amazed. "Now I see our old teacher truly understands ultimate truth," he announced. "No one in all of China can surpass him." Here's what I love about this story. Tokusan wasn't embarrassed by his mistake. He used it as a doorway into deeper authenticity. How often do we get so invested in appearing perfect, so afraid of being caught in an error, that we miss the gift hidden in our mistakes? Sometimes being wrong is exactly what we need to break out of patterns that have kept us playing small. The cook's simple question shattered Tokusan's autopilot and woke him up to a freedom he'd never tasted before. Maybe there's something in your life right now where you've been going through the motions, following someone else's schedule, instead of listening to your own inner timing. What would it feel like to be caught off guard in a way that wakes you up to what you really want? Sometimes the most embarrassing moments become the most liberating ones when we stop defending and start discovering. Master 𝘍𝙗𝑚 had a way of asking questions that would haunt his students for years. One day he asked them, "The world is such a wide world. Why do you answer a bell and put on ceremonial robes?" In other words, with infinite possibilities available to you, why do you keep responding to the same old conditioned patterns? Why do you keep showing up as the same person you've always been, instead of discovering who you might become? This question lives in every moment you choose: habit over possibility, safety over growth, the known over the mysterious. The bell rings with some familiar trigger, some old story about who you are or what you're supposed to do, and automatically you put on the robes of your conditioned identity. But what if you didn't answer that bell this time? What if you let it ring while you discovered what wants to emerge when you're not busy being who you think you are? One of 𝘼𝙣𝙘𝙞𝙣𝙩's students spent 3 years contemplating this question. Finally, he came back and said, "Master, I think I understand. We answer the bell and put on robes because in a world of infinite possibility, it's the choice to show up with intention that makes us human." 𝘼𝙣𝙘𝙞 nodded slowly. "And what," he asked, "makes that choice sacred?" The student was quiet for a long moment. "Because," he whispered, "it's the only moment we actually have." There's something profound here about the relationship between structure and freedom. We answer the bell not because we have to, but because choosing to respond consciously is different from reacting unconsciously. The question isn't whether to answer the bell, but how awake you are when you answer it. How present you are when you put on the robes of your daily life. Are you sleepwalking through your routines or dancing with them? Master 𝘍𝙘𝙘𝙘 was asked one of the most direct questions in all of Zen. What is Buddha? He was weighing flax at the time, completely absorbed in the simple task at hand. Without missing a beat, without dropping his attention from the work, he replied, 3 pounds of flax. The student stood there bewildered, expecting some profound philosophical answer about the nature of enlightenment. Instead, he got 3 pounds of flax. But here's what that student learned over the following months as he contemplated this seemingly ridiculous answer. Buddha isn't somewhere else, in some special state or distant realm. Buddha is right here, in the texture of flax between your fingers, in the weight that grounds you to this moment, in the simple attention that makes ordinary work sacred. The enlightenment you're seeking isn't hiding behind 3 pounds of flax. It's 3 pounds of flax, experienced with complete presence. Years later, that same student became a teacher and would often ask visitors, "What is Buddha?" No matter what elaborate spiritual answers they gave, he would hold up whatever object was nearest to him. A teacup, a fallen leaf, a piece of bread. Buddha, he would say simply, is exactly this, experienced exactly as it is, without needing it to be anything more. The sacred isn't separate from the ordinary. It's the ordinary experienced with extraordinary presence. What would change in your life if you really believed this? If you knew that Buddha nature, that divine essence, wasn't something to achieve, but something to recognize in the mundane details of your actual existence. 3 pounds of flax become a gateway when you stop looking past them towards some imaginary spiritual destination. 2 monks were watching a temple flag flapping in the wind, and they started arguing about what they were actually seeing. "The flag is moving," said one. "No, the wind is moving," said the other. They went back and forth, each convinced of his own perspective, until the 6th patriarch happened to walk by. He listened to their debate for a moment, then said quietly, "Neither the flag nor the wind is moving. Mind is moving." Both monks fell silent, suddenly recognizing something they had been completely missing. This story cuts to the heart of every argument you've ever had, every conflict that's ever drained your energy. How often are we fighting about externals when the real action is happening in the stories our minds are creating about what we're experiencing? The flag, the wind, your circumstances, other people's behavior, none of that is actually the source of your disturbance. It's your mind's movement, your thinking about what's happening, that creates suffering. But here's the beautiful thing about recognizing this. Once you see that mind is moving, you also see that mind can stop moving. You have a choice about whether to get caught up in the story or rest in the awareness that's watching the story unfold. The flag can flap, the wind can blow, life can be completely chaotic, and you can remain still at your center. Not because you're detached or don't care, but because you're resting in something more fundamental than the movement of circumstances. The next time you find yourself arguing with someone about what's really happening, remember the flag and the wind. Maybe the question isn't who's right about the external situation. Maybe the question is whether you can find stillness while the mind is creating stories about movement. Master 𝘼𝙘𝙘 asked his teacher 𝘼𝙣𝙘𝙘𝙙, "What is Buddha?" 𝘼𝙣𝙘's answer was immediate and direct. This mind is Buddha. Not your thoughts about Buddha, not your concepts or images or spiritual fantasies. This very mind that's listening to these words right now. The awareness that's been here all along, closer than your breath, more intimate than your heartbeat. You already have what you've been seeking. You already are what you've been trying to become. But watch what happens next in the story. Later, when other students asked 𝘼𝙘𝙘𝙘 the same question, he gave a completely different answer. No mind, no Buddha. The students were confused. Which was true? Was mind Buddha or not? They didn't understand that 𝘼𝙘𝙘𝙘 was offering medicine for whatever sickness was in front of him. To those who were too detached from their human experience, he said, "This mind is Buddha." To those who were too attached to spiritual concepts, he said, "No mind, no Buddha." Truth isn't a fixed formula you can memorize and apply everywhere. It's a living response to what's needed in each moment. Sometimes you need to remember that your ordinary mind is already sacred. Sometimes you need to let go of all ideas about sacredness and just be present to what is. The art is knowing which medicine the moment requires. Right now, what does this moment need from you? The recognition that this mind is Buddha, or the freedom of no mind, no Buddha? Maybe it needs both, the paradox held gently, without needing to resolve it into something your thinking mind can grasp. There was an old woman who lived near a famous temple, and she had a peculiar hobby. Whenever monks would ask her for directions to the temple, she would say sweetly, "Go straight ahead," and then mutter under her breath, "Another one off to waste his time with empty rituals." Joshua heard about this woman and decided to investigate. He approached her, asking for directions, and sure enough, she gave him the same response. The next day, Joshua announced to his students, "I have investigated that old woman." But what exactly had he investigated? Some say he discovered that she was testing whether people could hear the wisdom hidden in her apparent cynicism. Others say he realized that her directness was actually pointing people toward their own inner temple rather than encouraging dependency on external spiritual authorities. Still, others believe Joshua learned something about his own assumptions, about how he had been unconsciously judging her judgment. The truth is, We don't know exactly what Joshua discovered, and that might be the whole point. Sometimes investigation isn't about reaching conclusions, but about becoming curious enough to see beyond our first impressions. How often do we write people off as difficult or cynical, without wondering what wisdom might be hidden in their apparent negativity? How often do we assume we understand someone's motivations, without actually investigating our own projections? That old woman was doing something beautiful. She was refusing to enable spiritual seeking that avoided the real work of transformation. Her mutterings were a form of tough love, challenging people to examine whether they were looking for truth or just collecting spiritual experiences. Maybe the temple you're seeking isn't a place you go to, but a quality of presence you bring to wherever you already are. In the quietest monastery of all, a philosopher approached Buddha himself with a challenge. Without words and without silence, he said, "Tell me truth." How do you respond to a request like that? Words would violate the first condition. Silence would violate the second. Buddha simply sat there, completely present, completely still, completely himself. The philosopher bowed deeply and said, "I have cleared away my delusions and entered the true path." After the philosopher left, Ananda asked Buddha, what did he attain? Buddha smiled. A good horse runs even at the shadow of the whip. Some people are so ready for truth that the slightest pointing is enough. They don't need elaborate explanations or complex teachings. They just need someone to embody what they're seeking, to demonstrate through their very being that awakening is possible. But here's what's beautiful about this story. Buddha didn't do anything special. He didn't perform some miraculous teaching or enter a special state of consciousness. He just was himself, completely and authentically present. And somehow, that was exactly what the philosopher needed to see. That truth isn't something you acquire through words or achieve through silence. It's something you embody through the quality of your presence in any moment. What if the most profound teaching you could ever offer someone is simply being genuinely yourself? Not trying to be wise or spiritual or helpful, but just being real, present, available. Sometimes the deepest transmission happens not through what we say or don't say, but through the depth of being we bring to our encounters with life. The philosopher saw in Buddha's presence what he had been seeking in concepts and techniques. A human being completely at ease with being human. As these deeper stories work their way into your consciousness, feel how they're touching places in you that needed permission to let go. Permission to stop fighting over cats and sandals on your head instead. Permission to make mistakes and let them wake you up rather than shame you. Permission to answer life's bells consciously rather than automatically. Permission to find Buddha in 3 pounds of flax rather than searching for enlightenment in distant realms. Permission to recognize that your mind's movement is the real source of disturbance, and therefore your mind's stillness is the real source of peace. These teachings aren't asking you to become someone different. They're inviting you to stop hiding from who you already are, beneath all the stories about who you think you should be. As we drift deeper into the night, into the place where ancient wisdom meets your modern heart, even more profound recognitions await. The journey into trust and surrender is calling, where the impossible becomes not just possible, but inevitable. When you've been seeking long enough, when you've tried every technique and read every book, and still find yourself longing for something deeper, the ancient masters have one more gift to offer. It's the most counterintuitive teaching of all, the invitation to stop seeking entirely. Not because seeking is wrong, but because sometimes what you're looking for can only be found when you finally have the courage to stop looking. Master 𝘼𝙘𝙘 was sitting with a student who had been meditating for years, desperately trying to become enlightened. "What is Buddha?" the student asked for probably the 100th time. This time, instead of his usual, "This mind is Buddha," 𝘼𝙘𝙘 looked at him with infinite compassion and said, "This mind is not Buddha." The student's face went white. "But Master, yesterday you told me this mind is Buddha. Now you're saying it's not. Which is true?" 𝘼𝙘𝙘 smiled with the tenderness of someone watching a beloved child finally ready to let go of training wheels. "Neither," he said softly. "Buddha is not a thing to have or not have. Buddha is not a concept to understand or misunderstand. You've been trying so hard to become Buddha that you've completely missed being Buddha. You've been polishing a tile, thinking it could become a mirror." In that moment, something the student had been grasping for years simply fell away. Not because he finally understood it, but because he finally understood that understanding wasn't the point. Here's what nobody tells you about spiritual seeking. There comes a moment when all your effort, all your practice, all your sincere trying has to be offered up like flowers on an altar. Not because they were wasted, but because they brought you to the edge of a mystery that can only be entered empty-handed. You can't think your way into trust. You can't practice your way into surrender. You can only arrive at the place where you're finally willing to not know what comes next. Master Nansen was approached by a student who had been studying the concept of the pathless path for months. "I understand intellectually that seeking is the problem," the student said earnestly. "But how do I stop seeking without making stopping into another form of seeking?" Nansen was quiet for a long time before answering. "The path does not belong to perception, neither does it belong to non-perception," he said slowly. "Cognition is a delusion, and non-cognition is senseless. If you want to reach the pathless path, place yourself in the same freedom as sky. Name it neither good nor not good." The student stood there feeling like his mind was dissolving. This wasn't an answer his thinking could grasp, or his willpower could execute. It was an invitation into a way of being that was beyond all his categories of seeking and not seeking, knowing and not knowing. "But Master," he whispered, "how do I place myself in the freedom of sky?" Nansen pointed upward. "Does the sky try to be free?" That question hung in the air like a bell that keeps ringing long after it's been struck. Does the sky try to be free? Does it work at being spacious? Does it practice being open? Or is it free by its very nature, simply because it doesn't resist what moves through it? The clouds come and go, storms arise and pass, but the sky itself remains unchanged, untroubled, infinitely available. What if your true nature works the same way? What if freedom isn't something you achieve, but something you stop disturbing? In a monastery across the mountains, they were telling a story that would puzzle spiritual seekers for generations. A Chinese girl named 𝘼𝙘𝙘 had somehow split into two people. One version of her lived at home, sick and weak, barely able to leave her bed. The other version had married and moved to a distant city, where she lived a completely normal life and even had children. Both versions were equally real, equally her. When she finally died, the two 𝘼𝙘𝙘s merged back into one. The question that haunted everyone who heard this story was simple. Which one was the real 𝘼𝙘𝙘? Master Mumon, who recorded this story, offered a teaching that cuts to the heart of every identity crisis you've ever experienced. When you understand this, he said, you know it's possible to come out from one shell and enter another, like stopping at different hotels during a long journey. But if you cannot understand, when your time comes and your body dissolves, you'll be like a crab dropped in boiling water, struggling frantically with many hands and legs. In other words, if you cling too tightly to any single version of yourself, you'll suffer terribly when life asks you to change. Think about all the different selves you've been in your lifetime. The child you were, the teenager, the young adult, the person you are now. Which one is the real you? Maybe they all are. Maybe you're like 𝘼𝙘𝙘𝙘, constantly moving between different expressions of the same essential being. Maybe the question isn't which self is real, but whether you can love all yourselves with equal tenderness. The sick self and the healthy self, the confused self and the clear self, the self that struggles and the self that soars. What if they're all just different costumes worn by the same unchanging awareness? But here's where the story gets really interesting. According to the legend, when the two 𝘼𝙘𝙘𝙘s finally merged, she wasn't confused about which experiences belonged to which version. She remembered everything: the sickness and the health, the loneliness and the love, the confinement and the freedom. She had learned something that most of us spend our whole lives trying to understand: that we are vast enough to contain all our contradictions, spacious enough to hold all our different selves without needing to choose between them. The real 𝘼𝙘𝙘𝙘 was the one who could embrace both versions without rejecting either. Master Goso was famous for impossible questions, but this one stopped everyone in their tracks. When you meet a Zen master on the road, you cannot talk to him and you cannot face him with silence. What are you going to do? His students would sit with this riddle for months, their minds spinning in circles trying to find some response that fit the impossible criteria. If you can't speak and you can't stay silent, what options are left? One student spent an entire winter contemplating this question. He tried imagining every possible scenario, every creative response he could think of. Finally, spring arrived, and with it came a traveling master who stopped at their monastery. The student saw this as his chance to test the koan in real life. He approached the visiting master with Goso's impossible question burning in his mind. As he got closer, trying to figure out what to do, the master suddenly smiled and embraced him. In that moment of unexpected warmth, all the student's mental struggling simply melted away. He found himself laughing and crying at the same time, not because he had found the answer, but because he had discovered that some encounters transcend all categories of response. When he told Goso what had happened, his teacher nodded with deep satisfaction. "Now you understand," Goso said. "The answer isn't something you do or don't do. It's something you become. When you meet a real master on the road, your whole being becomes the response. Not through talking or not talking, but through the quality of presence you bring to the meeting." The student realized he had been trying to solve the riddle with his mind, when it could only be lived with his whole being. Maybe you've encountered people in your life who had this quality, where just being in their presence was more meaningful than any conversation you could have had. Where words felt unnecessary because something deeper was being communicated through the simple fact of authentic meeting. This is what Goso was pointing toward, the possibility of response that comes from your entire being rather than just your thinking mind. When you're truly present, when you're not hiding behind words or silence, but simply being yourself without apology, you become a living answer to questions you never even knew were being asked. Here's a story that will change how you think about obstacles and completion. Master Goso spoke of a buffalo who passes through an enclosure to the edge of an abyss. His horns pass through, his head passes through, his hooves pass through, Goso said slowly, building suspense. But why can't his tail pass through? What could possibly stop a tail if everything else has already made it through? His students wrestled with this image for months. Some thought it was about the last bit of ego that refuses to let go. Others believed it represented the final attachment that keeps us from complete freedom. But Goso had something more subtle in mind. The tail, he eventually revealed, represents compassion. The buffalo could escape completely, could disappear into the absolute freedom on the other side of the enclosure. But something in him refuses to abandon the world of struggle and suffering entirely. The tail that won't pass through is his connection to all the beings still trapped in the enclosure, still needing help, still seeking the way out. This is the paradox of true spiritual maturity. The closer you get to complete freedom, the more your heart opens to those who are still struggling. You could disappear into blissful detachment, but love won't let you. Some part of you remains available, remains engaged, remains committed to the possibility that everyone can find their way through the enclosure. The tail that gets stuck isn't a failure of enlightenment. It's enlightenment, choosing to stay connected to the world that needs it. Maybe you've felt this tension in your own spiritual journey. Moments when you touch something so peaceful, so free, that you almost don't want to come back to ordinary life with its problems and complications. But then you remember the people you love, the world that's suffering, the work that still needs to be done. And something in you chooses to stay engaged, to let your tail remain in the enclosure, even as your head touches freedom. This isn't spiritual failure. This is spiritual success of the highest order. A student once asked Master Joshu, Why did Bodhidharma come from India to China? This was one of the fundamental questions of Zen. What was the essential teaching that needed to be transmitted from Buddha's homeland to the culture where these practices would flourish? Joshu's answer was immediate and shocking in its ordinariness. The oak tree in the garden. The student stood there completely bewildered. He had asked about the deepest spiritual transmission in history and received a comment about landscaping. But over the following years, that student began to understand something revolutionary about Joshu's response. Bodhidharma didn't come to China to bring something exotic or foreign or special. He came to point people toward what was already there, already perfect, already expressing enlightenment in its own way. The oak tree doesn't try to be enlightened. It just grows according to its nature, responds to sun and rain and seasons without needing to understand the cosmic significance of what it's doing. It's completely itself without apology or effort or spiritual ambition. This is what Bodhidharma brought from India, not a new teaching, but a way of seeing that recognizes the Buddha nature that's already present in everything. In oak trees and busy people, and difficult circumstances, and ordinary Tuesday afternoons. The transmission wasn't about importing something foreign, but about discovering what had always been native to every moment, every place, every being. The oak tree in the garden is enlightened not because it achieved some special state, but because it never doubted its right to be exactly what it is. What would it feel like to live with that same unquestioning confidence in your own nature? To grow according to your genuine impulses, rather than your ideas about what growth should look like. To respond to life's seasons without needing to understand their cosmic purpose. The oak tree teaching is an invitation to stop trying to become enlightened and start expressing the enlightenment that's already here, waiting to be lived rather than achieved. Master Hyakujo was getting old and needed to choose someone to start a new monastery. He decided to hold a contest among his students. Placing a water pitcher on the ground, he asked, "Who can tell me what this is without using its name?" The head monk, who everyone expected to win, gave an elegant answer, "No one can call it a wooden shoe." Clever, poetic, showing off his understanding of Zen paradox. But then 𝘼𝙣𝙘𝙘 the cook simply walked over and kicked the pitcher over with his foot and walked away. Hyakujo smiled and said, "The head monk loses. 𝘼𝙣𝙘𝙘 will start the new monastery." Everyone was shocked. How could the uneducated cook defeat the learned scholar? But Hyakujo understood something about leadership that goes beyond intellectual brilliance or spiritual sophistication. True authority comes from the willingness to act directly from your authentic understanding rather than from your ideas about what others expect to hear. 𝘼𝙣𝙘𝙘 didn't try to impress anyone with clever words or philosophical concepts. He simply responded from his gut, did what the moment called for, and trusted that his authentic action would speak louder than any explanation. The head monk had fallen into the trap of performing wisdom instead of living it. His answer was technically correct but spiritually dead, more concerned with appearing enlightened than with responding genuinely to the question at hand. 𝘼𝙣𝙘𝙘's kick was alive, spontaneous, completely present to what was actually being asked beneath the words. He wasn't trying to show off his understanding. He was simply being himself without apology or calculation. This story lives in every moment when you have to choose between saying what you think people want to hear and expressing what you actually know to be true, between performing competence and acting from authentic confidence. Sometimes the most enlightened response isn't the most sophisticated one. Sometimes it's the one that comes from your deepest honesty rather than your cleverest thinking. 𝘼𝙣𝙘𝙤𝙘𝙤's willingness to risk looking foolish by following his genuine impulse is what made him worthy to lead others. The final story from this collection takes us to the very beginning of Zen's transmission to China. Bodhidharma sat facing a wall for 9 years, and during that time, his future successor stood in the snow outside, cutting off his own arm to demonstrate his sincerity. "My mind is not pacified," the successor cried. "Master, please pacify my mind." Bodhidharma turned from his wall gazing and said, "Bring me your mind and I will pacify it." The successor searched within himself frantically, trying to locate this mind that needed pacifying. Finally, he said, "When I search for my mind, I cannot find it anywhere." "There," said Bodhidharma with infinite gentleness, "I have pacified your mind." This is the ultimate teaching about the nature of the problems we think we have. When you look directly for the mind that's disturbed, the self that's broken, the person who needs fixing, what do you actually find? Not some solid, findable thing that can be repaired or improved, but a kind of open space, a flowing process, an awareness that's always been naturally peaceful beneath all the stories about disturbance. The mind that needs pacifying is like a mirage in the desert. The closer you get to it, the more it disappears. Not because it was never real, but because its reality was never what you thought it was. This successor learned what every seeker eventually discovers. The problem is not in finding peace, but in looking for the one who lacks peace. When you search for the worried mind, you find only awareness. When you look for the broken self, you find only space. When you hunt for the person who needs enlightenment, you discover only the enlightenment that was never actually missing. Bodhidharma didn't pacify his successor's mind by doing something to it. He pacified it by helping him see that there was no disturbed mind to be found. Right now, as you listen to these words, can you find the mind that came here seeking peace? Can you locate the self that needs healing? Look closely, with the same sincere intensity as Bodhidharma's successor. What you'll discover is what he discovered, that the seeker and the sought, the problem and the solution were never two different things. They were always one seamless movement of consciousness exploring itself, like the ocean pretending to search for water. These stories of profound trust have been working their magic in you while you listened, haven't they? Loosening the grip of concepts that seemed so solid, melting the boundaries between seeker and sought, revealing the freedom that was never actually confined. Each teaching points beyond itself toward the recognition that what you've been seeking through effort is what you've always been expressing through existence. The path that leads beyond all paths, the teaching that transcends all teachings, the awakening that discovers it, was never asleep. As we rest here at the threshold between seeking and finding, between effort and grace, even deeper mysteries are stirring in the ancient darkness, ready to reveal themselves to hearts that have learned to trust the unknown more than the familiar, the mystery more than the map. In the deepest hours before dawn, when the veil between worlds grows thin and ordinary reality reveals its more mysterious dimensions, the ancient masters preserve teachings that can only be understood by those who have learned to trust what cannot be grasped. These aren't stories for the beginner's mind, though paradoxically, they can only be received with beginner's mind. They're whispered secrets from the edge of the knowable, medicine for souls ready to dissolve into something larger than their individual story. There once was a gathering of all the Buddhas throughout time and space, a cosmic assembly that existed beyond the limitations of any single dimension. When the great Bodhisattva Manjushri arrived at this celestial conference, something unexpected had happened. The meeting was over. Each Buddha had returned to their own realm, and only one being remained in deep meditation. But this wasn't some ancient master or renowned teacher. It was a young girl sitting in samadhi so profound that even Manjushri, the Bodhisattva of transcendent wisdom, couldn't disturb her concentration. Buddha himself was still there, watching over this mysterious scene. Manjushri approached him, genuinely puzzled. "How is it possible," he asked, "for this girl to attain a meditative state that I, with all my eons of practice and accumulated wisdom, cannot even approach?" Buddha smiled with the tenderness reserved for those moments when the deepest teachings reveal themselves through the most unexpected vessels. "If you want to know how deep her realization goes," he said gently, "try to bring her out of meditation yourself." Manjushri tried everything in his vast repertoire of spiritual techniques. He walked around her 3 times and snapped his fingers, the traditional method for awakening someone from trance. Nothing. He used his miraculous powers to transport her to high heaven and called to her with the voice that can reach across dimensions. Still nothing. This girl remained completely absorbed in a depth of being that even the Bodhisattva of wisdom couldn't touch. Finally, Buddha offered a teaching that would shatter every assumption about spiritual development and worthiness. Even 100,000 Manjushris couldn't disturb her now, he said. But there's a Bodhisattva called Delusion who lives far below this place. If he comes, she will awaken immediately. Before Buddha had even finished speaking, this Bodhisattva Delusion sprang up from the earth and bowed. He approached the girl and simply snapped his fingers once. Instantly, she opened her eyes and emerged from her profound meditation, as if she had been waiting for exactly this moment, exactly this person, exactly this simple gesture. Here's what will bend your mind about this story. The girl couldn't be awakened by wisdom, by technique, by spiritual authority, or by transcendent power. She could only be awakened by someone who embodied what the tradition calls beginner's mind, so completely that even his name was delusion. Not because he was actually deluded, but because he had gone so far beyond the need to appear wise that he could afford to be called foolish. He had realized something that Manjushri, for all his accumulated knowledge, had temporarily forgotten, that the deepest awakening often looks like not knowing anything at all. This story lives in every moment when your accumulated spiritual knowledge becomes a barrier to fresh understanding. When your expertise prevents you from seeing what a complete beginner might notice immediately. The girl's meditation was so profound precisely because it wasn't trying to achieve anything or prove anything to anyone. It was pure being without agenda, which can only be met by pure presence without pretense. Sometimes, the most enlightened response comes from the part of you that doesn't know it's enlightened, that isn't carrying the weight of spiritual achievement or the burden of living up to anyone's expectations. What would it feel like to approach this moment with the same quality of not knowing that allowed delusion to succeed where Manjushri couldn't? To listen to these words not as someone accumulating spiritual insights, but as someone encountering mystery for the first time. The girl in the story teaches us that the deepest meditations aren't achieved through effort, but through a kind of innocent availability that doesn't even know it's available. Master 𝘍𝙘𝙘𝙘 was known for teachings that would stop his students' minds so completely that they had no choice but to rest in pure not knowing. One day, he held up his short staff and presented them with a riddle that has never been solved. If you call this a short staff, you oppose its reality. If you do not call it a short staff, you ignore the fact. Now, what do you wish to call this? His students sat in stunned silence, feeling their thinking minds short-circuit as they encountered the impossibility of the task. This wasn't a word game or a philosophical puzzle. 𝘍𝙘𝙘𝙘 was pointing towards something fundamental about the relationship between reality and the words we use to capture it. Every label, every name, every concept we apply to experience both reveals and conceals what's actually here. Call it a staff, and you've created a barrier between yourself and the immediate reality of wood and grain and weight. Don't call it a staff, and you've ignored the perfectly obvious truth of what you're looking at. So what do you do when both naming and not naming miss the mark? One student spent an entire season contemplating this riddle. He would sit in the garden, looking at stones and flowers, and trying to find a way to relate to them that neither imposed false concepts nor ignored obvious facts. Gradually, something began to shift in his perception. He started experiencing things before his mind labeled them, resting in the space between recognition and conceptualization. When he finally returned to 𝘍𝙘𝙘𝙘𝙘, he didn't try to answer the riddle with words. He simply picked up the staff, held it for a moment with complete presence, and then set it down again. 𝘍𝙘𝙘𝙘𝙘 nodded with deep satisfaction. "Now you understand," he said. "The staff is neither the word staff, nor the absence of the word staff. It's this immediate reality that exists before all our stories about what it is or isn't." This teaching cuts to the heart of how we relate to every experience in our lives. How often do we miss the actual reality of what's happening because we're so busy naming it, categorizing it, deciding whether we like it or not? Your feelings aren't just anxiety or sadness or joy. They're living energies with their own texture and movement and intelligence that exists before you label them. Your relationships aren't just good or bad or complicated. They're dynamic dances of connection and separation that flow in ways too subtle for any category to capture. 𝘍𝙘𝙘𝙘𝙀𝙘𝙀𝙀𝙀𝙀𝙀𝙀𝙀𝙀𝙀𝙀𝙀𝙀 is an invitation to meet life before your mind decides what it is, to rest in the immediate reality that's always richer and more mysterious than any description could contain. Master Basho offered one of the most paradoxical teachings ever recorded. When you have a staff, I will give it to you. If you have no staff, I will take it away from you. His students would stare at him as if he had lost his mind. How can you give someone something they already have? How can you take away something they don't possess? But Basho was pointing toward a way of relating to life that transcends the ordinary logic of having and not having, giving and receiving. Years later, one of his students had an insight that illuminated the entire teaching. "Master," he said excitedly, "I think I understand about the staff. When I think I have wisdom, you show me my ignorance. When I feel empty and lost, you reveal the knowledge that was always there. You give to those who are ready to receive and take from those who are clinging too tightly." Basho smiled, but then asked, "And what about the staff itself? What is this staff that can be given and taken?" The student was quiet for a long time before answering. "The staff is confidence," he whispered. "When I'm trying to be strong, you show me that real strength comes from acknowledging weakness. When I'm lost in self-doubt, you reveal the unshakable knowing that lives beneath all uncertainty. You're always offering exactly what I don't think I have and removing exactly what I think I need to hold on to." This time, Basho nodded, with complete approval. "Now you see," he said, "the staff supports whatever needs support and clears away whatever blocks the path. True teaching gives you what you actually need, not what you think you want. This is how life itself works when you learn to trust its intelligence. When you're feeling too detached, it gives you experiences that break your heart open. When you're overwhelmed by emotion, it offers opportunities for stillness and perspective. When you're taking yourself too seriously, it delivers humbling reminders of your humanity. When you're lost in self-doubt, it presents moments of undeniable clarity about your worth and purpose. Basho's staff is the perfect responsiveness of existence itself, always offering exactly what's needed for your next step in awakening, even when it's not what your personality would choose. In a teaching that dissolves all concepts of time and spiritual hierarchy, Master Hōen posed a question that has mystified seekers for centuries. The past and future Buddhas both are his servants. Who is he? Think about what this means. Every Buddha who has ever lived, every awakened being who will ever exist, all serving someone or something even more fundamental than enlightenment itself. Who or what could be so essential that even the highest spiritual realization bows before it? Students would meditate on this riddle for years, trying to imagine what could be more ultimate than Buddha nature, more fundamental than awakening itself. Some thought it referred to the absolute reality beyond all form. Others believed it pointed to the source consciousness from which all individual awareness arises. But the answer, when it finally dawned on them, was both simpler and more shocking than any philosophical concept. He is you. Not you as a separate person with problems and achievements, but you as the very awareness in which all experiences of Buddhas and non-Buddhas arise and pass away. Every teaching, every awakened being, every moment of enlightenment serves the fundamental awareness that's reading these words right now. Not because you're special or superior, but because you are the space in which all spiritual seeking and finding takes place. Past Buddhas exist in your awareness of them. Future Buddhas will arise within your capacity to recognize awakening. All of spiritual history, all the teachings and realizations and transmissions serve this immediate awareness that needs no improvement, no development, no enhancement of any kind. You are what every Buddha has been trying to point you back toward, the ordinary miracle of being conscious, aware, present to this moment. This isn't spiritual inflation or ego aggrandizement. It's the most humbling recognition possible that the awareness you take for granted is the very thing that makes all enlightenment possible. Without your capacity to be present, there would be no Buddha nature to recognize. Without your ability to listen, there would be no teachings to receive. You are not a student of consciousness. You are consciousness itself, temporarily pretending to be a student so it can remember what it never actually forgot. Master 𝘍𝙘𝙀 presented perhaps the most vertigo-inducing teaching of all. How will you proceed from the top of a 100-foot pole? His students could picture this perfectly, climbing to the highest possible point, achieving the ultimate spiritual attainment, reaching the peak of realization. And then what? How do you go further when you've already gone as far as possible? How do you transcend transcendence itself? The obvious answers seem to be that you can't go any further. You've reached the end of the path, the completion of the journey, the final achievement. But 𝘍𝙘𝙀 was pointing towards something that shatters every linear concept of spiritual progress. The top of the 100-foot pole isn't the end of the journey. It's the place where the real journey begins. It's where you discover that enlightenment isn't a destination you arrive at, but a doorway you step through into infinite space. One student meditated on this teaching for 3 years before having a breakthrough that changed everything. "Master," he said, trembling with excitement, "I think I understand. You proceed from the top of the 100-foot pole by letting go completely, by stepping off into empty space and trusting that there's something beyond even the highest attainment." 𝘍𝙘𝙀 smiled. "And what do you find when you step off?" The student's eyes filled with tears. "You find that you were never on a pole at all. You were always flying, always free, always in infinite space. The pole was just an illusion of limitation that you had to climb before you could see through it." This teaching lives in every moment when you think you've reached your limits, achieved your maximum potential, gone as far as you can go. Whether it's in your spiritual practice, your creative work, your capacity for love, or your ability to handle life's challenges. The top of the 100-foot pole is any place where you believe you've hit a ceiling, reached a boundary, found the edge of what's possible. But what if every apparent limitation is actually an invitation to discover limitlessness? What if every wall you encounter is really a doorway that only opens when you're willing to step through it without knowing what's on the other side? Master Tosotsu built 3 barriers that every serious student had to pass through. 3 questions that cut to the essence of what spiritual seeking is really about. First, he would say, in studying Zen, the aim is to see one's own true nature. Where is your true nature right now? Students would struggle with this for months, searching everywhere for some essential self they could identify and point to. Second, when you realize your true nature, you will be free from birth and death. But when you close your eyes for the final time, where are you then? This would perplex them even more, challenging their assumptions about what freedom from death actually means. Third, if you are truly free from birth and death, you should know where you are when your body dissolves into the 4 elements. Where are you then? These weren't philosophical questions to be answered, with concepts or meditation experiences to be achieved through practice. They were invitations to discover what remains when every identity, every experience, everything you think you are, is stripped away. A student spent 7 years working with these barriers before finally understanding that they weren't meant to be passed through sequentially. They all pointed to the same timeless recognition from different angles. Your true nature isn't located anywhere, because it's the very space in which all locations appear. Freedom from birth and death doesn't mean living forever, but recognizing what was never born and therefore cannot die. And when the body dissolves, you are where you always were, nowhere and everywhere, as the very awareness in which bodies appear and disappear like waves in an ocean. These 3 barriers reveal the deepest secret of spiritual seeking, that what you're looking for is what you're looking with. The true nature you're trying to find is the awareness that's trying to find it. The freedom you're seeking from birth and death is the timeless presence that observes birth and death without being touched by either. And the you that wonders where you'll be when your body is gone is the same you that wondered where you were before your body was born. Not a soul or spirit or energy that travels from one state to another, but the pure awareness that makes all states possible and remains utterly unchanged by any of them. In the final teaching from this mystical collection, Master Kembo was asked about the origin of the spiritual path itself. All Buddhas of the 10 directions enter the one road of nirvana, a student said. Where does that road begin? Without hesitation, Kembo raised his walking stick and drew a figure in the air. Here it is, he said simply. Another master, Umon, was asked the same question and responded by picking up his fan and saying, "This fan reaches to the 33rd heaven and strikes the nose of the deity there." Both teachers were pointing to something that dissolves every concept of spiritual journey as movement from here to there, from ignorance to enlightenment, from bondage to freedom. The road doesn't begin somewhere else and lead to nirvana. The road is nirvana, has always been nirvana, could never be anything other than nirvana. Every step you've ever taken, every breath you've ever breathed, every moment you've ever experienced has been the road itself. Not because everything is automatically perfect, but because everything is automatically included in the perfection that doesn't require anything to be different than it is. Kembo's walking stick and Umon's fan aren't pointing toward the beginning of the road. They're revealing that wherever you are right now, is where the road has always begun and where it always ends. The spiritual path doesn't start when you begin seeking. It started when you started existing. It doesn't end when you achieve some final realization. It ends in every moment when you recognize that seeking and finding, path and goal, traveler and destination were never actually separate. These mystical depths have been working their magic on you while you listened, haven't they? Dissolving the boundaries between wisdom and innocence, having and not having, past and future, seeking and finding. Each story a doorway into recognizing what was never hidden, each teaching a reminder of what you've never actually lost. The girl in meditation who could only be awakened by not knowing, the staff that exists beyond all naming, the giving and taking that serves exactly what's needed, the mysterious He who is served by all Buddhas, the 100-foot pole that opens into infinite space, the 3 barriers that all point to the same timeless recognition, and the road that begins wherever you are. As these ancient whispers fade into the eternal silence from which they came, the deepest teachings of all are stirring in the darkness, ready to reveal the final secrets to hearts that have learned to trust mystery more than meaning, presence more than understanding, being more than becoming. There comes a moment in every heart's journey when all the seeking, all the trying, all the endless effort to become someone better simply melts away like snow in spring sunshine. These final stories aren't about achieving anything or understanding complex teachings. They're about the gentle recognition that you've been carrying what you thought you were looking for all along, like holding a candle while searching for light. Let these ancient whispers work their quiet magic as you rest deeper into the peace that was never actually missing. An old master was sitting in his garden when a student approached, exhausted from years of spiritual striving. "Teacher," he said wearily, "I've practiced every meditation, studied every text, followed every instruction you've given me, but I still don't feel enlightened. What am I missing?" The master smiled gently and pointed to a flower blooming beside the path. "Does that flower try to be beautiful?" he asked. The student looked at the simple wildflower, its petals soft in the morning light. "No, master. It just blooms naturally." "Then you understand everything," the master said softly. "You've been trying so hard to become what you already are. Stop trying to bloom and notice that you're already flowering." In that moment, something the student had been carrying for years simply dropped away. The weight of becoming, the pressure of achieving, the endless sense that he wasn't enough exactly as he was. He sat down beside the flower and, for the first time in years, felt completely at home in his own skin. No accomplishment, no realization, no dramatic breakthrough. Just the quiet recognition that he'd been perfect all along, like the flower that never doubted its right to exist. That evening, he told the master, "I finally understand why you never pushed me harder in my practice." The old teacher's eyes twinkled. Because flowers that are forced to bloom out of season always wilt quickly. Natural flowering happens in its own time, when the heart is finally ready to stop trying so hard. Maybe you know this feeling of exhaustion from trying to become something other than what you are. The relief that comes when you finally give yourself permission to stop improving and start appreciating. Like taking off shoes that were always a size too small. There's something so soothing about letting yourself be exactly who you are right now, without apology or explanation. Feel that permission settling into your body as you listen, the gentle allowance to be human without having to be superhuman. There was a woman who spent her entire life convinced she was broken and needed fixing. She tried therapy, meditation, self-help books, countless techniques to heal what she was certain was damaged beyond repair. One day, feeling particularly defeated, she sat by a lake and watched the water reflecting the sky. The surface was rippled by wind, distorting the reflection, making everything appear fragmented and unclear. "That's me," she thought sadly. Broken, distorted, unable to reflect clearly. As she sat there, an old fisherman settled beside her. They sat in comfortable silence for a while before he spoke. "Beautiful lake," he said simply. She looked at him in surprise. "But it's all choppy and disturbed," she replied. "The reflection is completely broken." The fisherman smiled. "The reflection changes with the wind, but the water itself is always perfect. Calm or stormy, clear or rippled, it's always exactly what water is meant to be. Your surface thoughts and emotions might get stirred up by life's winds, but the depth of who you are remains untouched, always clear, always perfect water." Something in his words reached a place inside her that no technique had ever touched. She realized she'd been trying to fix the ripples instead of recognizing the unchanged perfection of the water itself. Her anxiety, her sadness, her struggles weren't signs that she was broken. They were just temporary weather on the surface of something eternally peaceful. That day, by the lake, she stopped trying to heal herself and started appreciating herself. The ripples continued to come and go, but she never again forgot that beneath them lay depths of unshakable calm. Feel into this truth as you rest here tonight. Whatever storms might be moving across the surface of your mind, whatever worries or sadness or confusion might be stirring things up, underneath it all lies something that has never been disturbed. Not because you've achieved it or earned it, but because it's simply what you are when you stop identifying with the ripples and remember the lake. A teacher was known for never giving advice, never telling people what to do, never offering solutions to their problems. Instead, he would simply sit with people in whatever they were experiencing, offering a quality of presence that somehow made everything feel workable. One day, a student asked him, "Master, why don't you ever teach us anything? Why don't you give us practices or instructions?" The teacher was quiet for a long moment before responding. "Because you don't need to learn how to be yourself," he said gently. "You need to unlearn all the ways you've been taught to be someone else." He pointed to a bird singing in the tree above them. Did anyone teach that bird how to sing? Did it take singing lessons or practice vocal exercises? The student shook his head. It sings because singing is its nature. It doesn't try to sing like other birds or worry about whether its song is good enough. It just opens its heart and lets its unique voice emerge. The teacher's eyes were soft with compassion. You've been trained to doubt your natural song, to think you need improvement before you're worthy of being heard. My teaching is simply to sit with you until you remember that your voice is already beautiful exactly as it is. That student spent the next month not trying to learn anything new, but instead noticing all the ways she had been hiding her authentic self. The way she changed her opinions based on who she was talking to. The way she performed emotions she thought others wanted to see. The way she apologized for taking up space, for having needs, for being imperfect. Slowly, gently, she began letting these learned behaviors fall away. Not forcing anything, just no longer feeding the habits that kept her natural self hidden. Like peeling away layers of clothing she'd outgrown, she discovered someone underneath who was surprisingly comfortable just being herself. When she returned to the teacher, she was glowing with a quiet confidence. "I understand now," she said. "Freedom isn't about becoming someone new. It's about stopping the exhausting work of being someone you're not." The teacher nodded with deep satisfaction. "Now you're singing your true song," he said. "And the world is more beautiful because of it." What would it feel like to let your guard down completely, right now? To stop performing or trying to be impressive and just rest in being exactly who you are, flaws and gifts all mixed together? There's something so deeply restful about authenticity, about the end of pretending, about coming home to yourself after a long day of wearing masks that never quite fit properly. A man had been carrying a heavy burden for so long that he'd forgotten what it felt like to walk without the weight. Every morning, he would pick up this enormous pack filled with regrets from the past and worries about the future, and trudge through his day bent over from the load. One evening, completely exhausted, he stopped to rest beside a stream. A child playing nearby noticed his struggle and asked, "Mister, why are you carrying all that heavy stuff?" The man looked at his pack as if seeing it for the first time. I don't remember," he said slowly. "I think I thought I needed it for the journey." The child tilted her head curiously. "What's in there?" The man opened the pack and began pulling things out. Guilt over mistakes he'd made years ago, anxiety about things that might never happen, shame about not being further along in life, fear that he wasn't good enough, worthy enough, successful enough. The child listened with innocent wonder. "But those aren't real things," she said simply. "You can't actually hold a worry in your hands or carry a regret on your back. You're carrying thoughts about things, not the things themselves." In that moment of pure clarity from an untrained mind, the man saw the truth that had been hidden by years of psychological complexity. He had been carrying mental constructs as if they were physical objects, treating thoughts as if they had weight and substance. One by one, he released his grip on these invisible burdens, watching them dissolve back into the nothingness from which they came. Standing up straight for the first time in years, he felt lighter than air. "Thank you," he told the child. "You've just taught me that freedom isn't about getting rid of problems. It's about recognizing that most of what I thought were problems were just thoughts I was taking too seriously." The child skipped away, leaving the man alone by the stream with a revelation that would change everything. He realized that happiness wasn't something he needed to achieve or create. It was simply what remained when he stopped carrying around thoughts that made him miserable. Like the sun that's always shining even when clouds temporarily block its light, joy was his natural state when nothing was obscuring it. From that day forward, whenever he noticed himself picking up the old pack of mental burdens, he would remember the child's innocent question and choose to travel light instead. What heavy thoughts are you carrying tonight that you could simply set down? Not because they're wrong or bad, but because you're tired of the weight and ready to remember what it feels like to move through life with ease. Feel the relief of letting your mental muscles relax, of no longer holding on to things that exist only in your imagination. There was a gardener who spent his whole life trying to grow the perfect flower. He read every book, tried every technique, obsessed over soil conditions and watering schedules and optimal sunlight. Despite his efforts, his garden remained ordinary, beautiful in its own way, but nothing extraordinary or award-winning. He grew increasingly frustrated, comparing his flowers to those in magazines and feeling like a failure. One day, his young granddaughter visited and wandered into the garden while he was working. She stopped in front of a simple daisy and gasped with delight. "Grandpa, this is the most beautiful flower I've ever seen." He looked at the ordinary daisy with its plain white petals and yellow center. "But honey, it's just a common daisy. Nothing special about it." She looked at him with the wisdom that sometimes comes through children's hearts. "Grandpa, it's not trying to be anything other than exactly what it is. That's what makes it perfect." In that moment, decades of striving fell away. He saw his garden with fresh eyes and realized it had always been perfect, not because it met some external standard, but because every flower was expressing its own nature completely. The roses were being roses without apology. The sunflowers were reaching toward light without self-consciousness. The weeds were growing with the same innocent vitality as the prized specimens. His garden was a symphony of authentic being, each plant singing its own note in the grand composition of life. That evening, he sat among his flowers with a peace he'd never felt before. He finally understood that the perfect garden he'd been trying to create had been there all along, waiting for him to see it with eyes of appreciation rather than judgment. The next time someone visited and complimented his beautiful garden, he would smile and say, "Thank you. I finally learned to let each flower be itself, instead of trying to make them all be prize winners." Turns out that's when the real beauty appears. Rest in this truth as you feel yourself settling deeper into sleep. You don't need to be a prize-winning version of yourself to be worthy of love and appreciation. Your authentic being, with all its imperfections and unique qualities, is already a perfect expression of life, flowering in its own irreplaceable way. Let yourself bloom naturally, without force or comparison, trusting that your particular way of being human is exactly what the world needs. An old woman lived alone in a small cottage and had grown tired of feeling lonely. She decided to get a mirror to have someone to talk to, but when she looked into it, she was disappointed. "This person looks sad and wrinkled and old," she thought. "I don't want to spend time with someone so dreary." so she tried smiling at the mirror, but the reflection looked forced and fake. She tried standing up straighter, arranging her hair differently, attempting to look younger and happier. But nothing she did seemed to create the companion she was hoping for. Finally, exhausted from trying to change what she saw, she simply sat down in front of the mirror and sighed deeply. "I guess this is just who I am," she said to her reflection. "Old and tired and imperfect." But as she spoke these words with gentle acceptance rather than harsh judgment, something shifted in her face. A softness appeared around her eyes, a kindness in her expression that had been hidden by all her efforts to be different. For the first time, she looked at her reflection with compassion instead of criticism. "You know what?" she said to the mirror with growing warmth. "You've lived a long life and learned a lot. You've loved people and been hurt and kept going anyway. You have stories and wisdom and a heart that's still capable of kindness. Maybe you're not young and perfect, but you're real and you're here, and that's actually quite remarkable." As she spoke these words of acceptance, her reflection began to glow with a beauty that had nothing to do with youth or appearance. She had found the companion she was looking for all along, herself, appreciated rather than criticized, loved rather than judged. From that day forward, she never felt lonely again. Not because her circumstances changed, but because she had learned the secret of good company, treating yourself with the same kindness you would offer a dear friend. Whenever she felt critical thoughts arising, she would look in the mirror and speak to herself the way she would speak to someone she loved who was struggling. The cottage filled with warmth and laughter as she discovered that the best relationship she could ever have was the one with herself. Let this gentle teaching settle into your heart as you rest. The person listening to these words right now is worthy of the same kindness and acceptance you would offer to anyone else you cared about. You don't need to be different or better or more accomplished to deserve your own friendship. You just need to treat yourself the way love would treat you, with patience, understanding, and appreciation for the remarkable being you already are. In the final story from these ancient teachings, there was a seeker who had traveled to every holy place, studied with every teacher, tried every practice, and still felt that something essential was missing. Exhausted and discouraged, he decided to give up his spiritual quest and just live an ordinary life. He got a simple job, moved to a quiet town, and stopped trying to be anything other than a regular person, doing regular things. But something unexpected happened in this surrender. Without the pressure of becoming enlightened, he began to notice small miracles he had missed while seeking grand realizations. The way morning light touched his coffee cup, the kindness in a stranger's smile, the simple pleasure of breathing without having to make it into a meditation practice. Life became sacred not because he was doing spiritual practices, but because he was finally present enough to notice that life had always been sacred. One day, an old teacher he had studied with years before happened to pass through his town. "I heard you gave up the spiritual path," the teacher said with a gentle smile. "How do you feel about that?" The former seeker looked around at the ordinary street, the regular people going about their daily business, the simple beauty of an unremarkable Tuesday afternoon. "I didn't give up the path," he said with quiet joy. "I discovered that everything is the path when you stop trying to get somewhere else. The seeking was the only thing that was keeping me from finding what was always right here." The teacher nodded with deep understanding. "Now you know the greatest secret," he said. "Enlightenment isn't a special state you achieve. It's the natural condition you discover when you stop disturbing your own peace. Welcome home to yourself. You've been here all along." As these ancient whispers fade into the silence from which they came, feel how they've been working their gentle magic on your heart. Each story a reminder that what you've been seeking through effort is what you've always been expressing through existence. The freedom to be yourself without apology, the peace that comes from stopping the exhausting work of being someone else, the recognition that you are already the flower you've been trying to become. You are already home in yourself, already complete, already worthy of love exactly as you are. Rest here in this ultimate recognition, this gentle homecoming, this quiet end to all seeking, where you discover that what you were looking for was looking for itself all along. Let yourself be held by the ancient wisdom that has always known your perfection, even when you forgot it yourself. There's a special quality to twilight, isn't there? That gentle hour when day softly surrenders to night, when everything settles into a deeper rhythm, when the whole world seems to exhale with relief. These final stories carry that same twilight energy, not the excitement of beginning a journey, but the peaceful satisfaction of recognizing you've already arrived at exactly where you needed to be all along. Let them carry you home to yourself, to the place you never actually left, to the peace that was always waiting patiently for your return. A woman spent her entire adult life feeling like she was living someone else's story. She worked in a job that looked good on paper, but felt empty inside. She lived in a house that impressed the neighbors, but never felt like home. She maintained relationships that looked perfect from the outside, but left her feeling unknown and unseen. Every morning she would wake up with the familiar ache of living a life that fit her like an expensive dress in the wrong size, beautiful, but somehow all wrong. One evening, walking home from another day of pretending to be someone she wasn't, she passed a small garden where an elderly man was watering his vegetables. Something about the simple contentment in his movements made her stop. "Beautiful garden," she said, though the plants were ordinary and the space was small. He looked up with eyes that sparkled with genuine joy. "Thank you," he said. "I've been tending it for 40 years, and I'm still amazed every day by how things grow when you give them what they actually need instead of what you think they should want." His words hit her like a gentle lightning bolt. She had been trying to grow her life according to other people's ideas of what success should look like, never asking what she actually needed to flourish. That night, for the first time in years, she sat quietly and asked herself a simple question: what do I actually need to feel at home in my own life? The answers that came weren't dramatic or revolutionary. More time in nature, work that felt meaningful, even if it paid less, relationships where she could be honestly herself, permission to be ordinary and imperfect and real. It took her 2 years to gradually reshape her life around these simple truths. She left the impressive job for work that felt aligned with her values. She moved to a smaller place that felt like home the moment she walked through the door. She gently released relationships that required her to perform and deepened the ones where she could breathe freely. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would make headlines, just a quiet return to herself after years of living in exile from her own heart. Years later, when people asked her about the changes she'd made, she would smile and say, "I didn't change my life. I just stopped living someone else's life and came home to my own. It was always here, waiting for me to be brave enough to inhabit it fully." She learned that home isn't a place you go to. It's a way of being that you allow. It's the deep exhale that comes when you finally stop trying to be anyone other than exactly who you are. Feel into that possibility as you rest here tonight. What would it feel like to completely come home to yourself? To stop the exhausting work of trying to fit into spaces that were never meant for you? There's a version of your life where you feel at home in your own skin, where your days feel aligned with your deepest truth, where you can breathe freely without apology or explanation. That life isn't somewhere in the future waiting to be earned. It's here now, waiting to be chosen. A teacher was asked by his students to share the most important thing he had learned in 40 years of spiritual practice. They expected some profound wisdom about consciousness or enlightenment or the nature of reality. Instead, he was quiet for a long time before saying, "I learned that everything I was seeking me." The students looked puzzled, so he continued with infinite gentleness. "Peace wasn't hiding from me. I was running away from peace. Love wasn't withholding itself. I was withholding myself from love. Wisdom wasn't playing hard to get. I was making it more complicated than it needed to be. The moment I stopped chasing and allowed myself to be found, everything I had been seeking revealed itself as already here, already present, already mine." One student raised her hand tentatively. "But teacher, how do you stop seeking? How do you let yourself be found?" The old man smiled with the tenderness of someone who had walked this path himself. "The same way you stop running and allow someone who loves you to catch up with you," he said. "You simply slow down, turn around, and notice that what you were running toward was always running toward you too. Seeking ends not when you find what you're looking for, but when you realize what you're looking for has been calling your name all along." That evening, the student sat in her room and tried this strange practice of allowing herself to be found. Instead of reaching toward peace, she imagined peace reaching toward her. Instead of grasping for answers, she pictured wisdom gently offering itself to her open hands. Instead of working to create love in her heart, she simply allowed the love that was already there to reveal itself. It was like switching from swimming upstream to floating downstream, from pushing doors that said, "Pull," to flowing with the natural direction of opening. "Teacher," she said the next day, "I think I understand. Seeking was the only thing preventing finding. I was so busy looking for what I wanted that I missed what was looking for me. It's like happiness was knocking on my door while I was out searching for happiness in other neighborhoods. The teacher nodded with deep satisfaction. "Now you know the secret that ends all spiritual seeking," he said. "You are what you seek, and what you seek is seeking itself through you." The lover and the beloved were never two different beings having a relationship. They were always one being temporarily pretending to be two so it could experience the joy of coming home to itself. What if you stopped trying to find peace and allowed peace to find you? What if instead of working so hard to create the life you want, you simply opened to receive the life that's trying to give itself to you? There's something so restful about this reversal, this shift from effort to allowance, from seeking to being sought. Feel yourself relaxing into being found by the love, the peace, the wholeness that has been pursuing you far longer than you've been pursuing it. An artist had been struggling for years to create the perfect painting. She would start with grand visions and detailed plans, but every canvas ended up feeling forced, artificial, disconnected from what she was really trying to express. Frustrated and exhausted, she finally gave up trying to paint masterpieces and decided to simply paint what was true for her in each moment. She painted her morning coffee cup, her rumpled bedsheets, the way light fell across her kitchen table. Nothing important or impressive, just honest observations of ordinary beauty. Something magical began to happen. Without the pressure of creating something significant, her paintings became alive in a way they never had before. People would stop in front of her simple domestic scenes and find themselves moved to tears without understanding why. "There's something so real about these," they would say. "They make me feel homesick for my own life." She realized she had been trying so hard to paint like a great artist that she had forgotten to paint like herself. The moment she gave up trying to be impressive and started being authentic, her true voice emerged naturally, like a song that had been waiting patiently to be sung. Years later, when her paintings were displayed in galleries and people called her work profound, she would laugh gently and say, "I didn't become a better artist. I just stopped trying to be an artist and started being myself with a paintbrush." Turns out that was all the art world was waiting for, someone brave enough to show up as exactly who they are without apology or pretense. She had learned that greatness doesn't come from trying to be great. It comes from being so authentically yourself that your unique way of seeing the world becomes a gift to everyone who encounters it. This truth applies to every area of life, doesn't it? How often do we exhaust ourselves trying to be impressive instead of simply being real? Your authentic presence, your genuine way of moving through the world, your particular blend of wisdom and confusion and heart, this is what the world is actually hungry for. Not another performance of who you think you should be, but the irreplaceable gift of who you actually are. Let yourself come home to your own authentic expression, trusting that being real is always more powerful than being perfect. A man carried a photograph in his wallet for 20 years, a picture of a beautiful house with a garden, representing everything he thought would make him happy. He worked endless hours, saved every penny, sacrificed relationships and health, all in service of someday owning that dream house. Finally, after 2 decades of struggle, he had enough money to buy the house in the photograph. But when he walked through the door on moving day, something unexpected happened. Instead of the joy and fulfillment he had imagined, he felt strangely empty and disconnected. That evening, sitting alone in his dream house, he realized what had happened. He had spent so many years living for the future that he had forgotten how to be present. He had been so focused on acquiring the right circumstances for happiness that he had missed all the opportunities for happiness that had been available along the way. The house was beautiful, but it couldn't give him what he thought it would, because what he was really seeking wasn't a place. It was a feeling of being at home with himself. The next morning, instead of trying to feel grateful for what he had achieved, he decided to simply be present to what was actually here. He made coffee slowly, paying attention to the smell and the warmth of the cup in his hands. He sat in the garden and really looked at the flowers, the way bees moved from bloom to bloom, the particular quality of morning light. For the first time in 20 years, he wasn't planning for the future or working toward a goal. He was just here, in this moment, in this life, in this breath. Something he had been seeking for decades finally found him. Not because his circumstances were perfect, but because he had finally arrived in his own life. He realized that home had never been a place he needed to reach. It was a quality of presence he needed to remember. The photograph had served its purpose, not by leading him to the right house, but by teaching him that no external achievement could substitute for the simple miracle of being fully present to whatever life he was already living. He kept the photograph, but now it reminded him of something different. Not a destination to reach, but a lesson about the importance of being here now, wherever here happens to be. "I thought I was working toward a dream house," he would tell friends. "But what I really needed to learn was how to dream while awake, how to find magic in ordinary moments, how to be at home in any house when I'm finally at home with myself." What dreams are you carrying that might be disguised invitations to be more present to the life you already have? What if the happiness you're working toward is actually available right now, hidden in the simple act of fully inhabiting this moment? Home isn't a place you arrive at through achievement. It's a quality of presence you can access any time you stop rushing toward the future and allow yourself to land completely in the now. A woman had been keeping a journal for 30 years, filling notebook after notebook with her thoughts, dreams, fears, and daily experiences. One day, feeling nostalgic, she decided to read through some of her old entries. What she discovered amazed her. The same themes appeared again and again across decades. The longing to feel authentic, the desire for meaningful connection, the search for work that mattered, the wish to live with more presence and less anxiety. But what struck her most was how often she had written about feeling like she was waiting for her real life to begin. At 25, she was waiting to feel like a real adult. At 35, she was waiting to find her true calling. At 45, she was waiting for her children to be older so she could focus on herself. At 55, she was still writing about waiting for the right time, the right circumstances, the right level of readiness to finally start living authentically. Seeing this pattern laid out across 30 years of entries, was both heartbreaking and revelatory. "I've been in my real life all along," she wrote that day. "Every moment I thought was preparation was actually the main event. Every stage I thought was a stepping stone was actually a destination in itself. I've been so busy getting ready to live that I've missed the fact that I've been living all along." That insight changed everything. Not her circumstances. Those remained largely the same. But her relationship to her circumstances transformed completely. She stopped waiting for permission to take her own life seriously. She started treating her current stage as the real thing, rather than a rehearsal for something better. She began savoring ordinary Tuesday afternoons with the same appreciation she had been saving for special occasions. Her last journal entry from that year read, "Today I realized that the life I was waiting to live was the life I was already living. I wasn't missing anything except the recognition that this is it. This ordinary, imperfect, beautiful, difficult, miraculous existence is the real thing. There's no dress rehearsal, no practice round, no waiting room. This is the main stage, and I'm already in the spotlight." How long have you been waiting for your real life to begin? What if this moment, exactly as it is not preparation for something better, but the actual gift you've been waiting to receive? Your life isn't a rough draft that needs to be perfected before it counts. It's the final version, the only version, the precious limited edition that you get to live once. Come home to the radical recognition that you're already living the life you've been waiting for. A grandfather was babysitting his 5-year-old granddaughter when she asked him the question that would change his entire perspective on existence. "Grandpa," she said, with the serious intensity that only children can muster, "where do we live?" Thinking she was testing his knowledge, he began listing addresses. "Well, we live in this house, on Maple Street, in the town of..." But she interrupted him with a shake of her head. "No, Grandpa. Where do we really live?" He tried again, expanding his scope. "On Earth, in the solar system, in the Milky Way galaxy." Again she shook her head, but this time she was smiling. "We live in right now," she said with absolute certainty. "This moment is our house. This breath is our home. We live in the space between yesterday and tomorrow, and that space is called today." The grandfather felt something shift in his chest as her words penetrated deeper than any spiritual teaching he had ever heard. For 70 years, he had been thinking of life as a series of destinations: childhood leading to adulthood, school leading to career, work leading to retirement. He had spent decades mentally living either in memories of the past or plans for the future, treating the present moment as a brief stopping point between more important places. But his granddaughter had just revealed the truth he had been missing. The present moment isn't a location you pass through on your way somewhere else. It's the only place where life actually happens. That night, after she had gone to bed, he sat on his porch and practiced living where his granddaughter had told him they lived. In right now, not thinking about tomorrow's doctor appointment or yesterday's conversation. Just here, in this breath, in this moment, in this simple experience of being alive on a Tuesday evening in October. For the first time in decades, he felt completely at home. Not because anything had changed about his circumstances, but because he had finally moved into the only house where life actually takes place, the eternal present moment. From that day forward, whenever he felt anxious about the future or regretful about the past, he would remember his granddaughter's wisdom and ask himself, "Where do I live?" The answer always brought him home, right here, right now, in this breath, in this moment, in this miraculous, temporary house called today. He learned that homesickness isn't about missing a place. It's about forgetting to be present to the place where you already are. Feel yourself coming home to this moment as you listen, not as a stopping point on your way to somewhere better, but as the actual destination you've been seeking all along. This breath, this heartbeat, this simple awareness of being alive, this is where you live. This is the only address that matters, the only home you'll ever need, the only place where peace has ever been found. In the final story of our journey together, there was a seeker who had spent her entire life looking for something she couldn't name. She read every spiritual book, attended every workshop, traveled to sacred sites around the world, always feeling like she was on the verge of finding what she was seeking but never quite arriving. As she grew older, the seeking became more desperate, tinged with the fear that she was running out of time to find whatever it was that would finally make her feel complete. One day, sitting exhausted in an airport after another unsuccessful pilgrimage, she overheard a conversation between a mother and her young son. The boy was asking, "Mommy, when will we get there?" And the mother replied with gentle wisdom, "Sweetheart, we're always already there. Wherever we are, that's where we are. The question isn't when we'll arrive, but whether we're paying attention to where we already are." Something in those simple words pierced through decades of searching and landed in the deepest part of her heart. She realized she had been asking the wrong question her entire life. Instead of "when will I find what I'm looking for?" she should have been asking, "what am I missing about what's already here?" Instead of "where do I need to go to feel complete?" she should have been asking, "how can I recognize the completeness that's already present?" Sitting there in that busy airport, surrounded by the ordinary chaos of travelers and announcements and fluorescent lights, she had the most profound spiritual experience of her life. Not a dramatic vision or mystical revelation, but a simple, quiet recognition that she was already exactly where she needed to be. The peace she had been seeking in temples and ashrams and sacred mountains was available right here, in Terminal C, in this plastic chair, in this moment of finally stopping the search and being present to what was already given. She never went on another spiritual seeking journey. Not because she had given up on growth or learning, but because she had finally come home to herself. She continued to read and study and practice, but now these activities arose from contentment rather than seeking, from celebration rather than desperation. She had learned the greatest secret. What she had been seeking was the very awareness that was doing the seeking. What she had been trying to find was what she had been looking with all along. The seeker and the sought had never been two different things. They had always been one consciousness temporarily pretending to be lost, so it could experience the incomparable joy of coming home to itself. Years later, when people asked her about her spiritual journey, she would smile and say, "I traveled to every corner of the world looking for home, only to discover that home was never a place. It was a quality of presence I could access any time I stopped trying to be anywhere other than where I already was. The journey ended not when I found what I was looking for, but when I realized I had never actually been lost." And so we come to the end of these ancient whispers, though endings and beginnings are just stories we tell ourselves about the eternal unfolding that never actually stops. You have listened with your whole being to voices from across centuries, letting their timeless wisdom work its gentle magic on your modern heart. Each story has been a doorway, each teaching a homecoming, each moment of recognition, a step deeper into the truth you have always known, but sometimes forget. You are not broken and needing to be fixed. You are not lost and needing to be found. You are not incomplete and needing to be filled. You are the very awareness in which all stories of brokenness and wholeness appear and disappear like clouds in an infinite sky. You are the home you have been seeking, the peace you have been pursuing, the love you have been longing for. Not as a future possibility, but as a present reality. Not as something to achieve, but as something to recognize. Not as a destination to reach, but as the ground you are already standing on. Rest now in this ultimate homecoming, this final recognition, this gentle end to all seeking, where you discover that what you were looking for was looking for itself through you all along. The ancient masters who shared these gifts across the centuries are smiling now, seeing their deepest teachings fulfilled in this moment of your complete arrival in yourself. You have always been home. You have always been whole. You have always been exactly what the universe needs you to be. Sleep now in this knowing, held by the love that has never left you, supported by the peace that is your true nature, embraced by the silence from which all words arise and to which they eternally return.